Hey folks, this is Kalani. Quite a few changes were snuck into the game in this past week, many of which weren't received very well. Some of them were reverted, some of them have been changed yet again, and some of them are actually useful. Let's take a look at what's happened and break it all down. First up this week, there have been quite a few changes, and then not changes, and then maybe changes to the Shards of Domination system. If that's a bit confusing, I wouldn't really blame you. Players discovered that sometime on Tuesday, right after the weekly reset, the dev team had pushed a stealth hotfix, which means an undocumented change that players had to find for themselves that significantly nerfed every Shard of Domination rune word set bonus. The Blood rune word, Blood Link, was nerfed by about 40%, the Frost set, the Winds of Winter, was nerfed by about 17%, and then the Unholy rune word, Chaos Bane, was nerfed by 50%. Those were some pretty heavy nerfs for all of the set bonuses, which was kind of weird, because while the Unholy set definitely needed some tuning, it's still by far the most powerful set bonus for almost every single player and class. It doesn't really help the overall balance of the system when you nerf the already lower performing set bonuses at the same time. Thankfully, all of these nerfs were quickly reverted after players complained about the changes, both in terms of them being crazy nerfs to the overall power of the set bonuses, and about the fact that these nerfs were completely unexpected and undocumented, because it never feels good to have something pulled out from under your feet. These changes were then put on the back burner, presumably to give players a chance to actually see the planned changes and react accordingly, whether that be swapping up their shard sets or maybe refocusing their upgrading efforts into a different rune word, but then the dev team came out with this blue post. Earlier this week, a change to the Power of Shard of Domination set bonuses, e.g. Chaos Bane, was briefly applied to the live game. We are no longer planning to proceed with that change at all. We may make further adjustments in the coming days, but we will not reduce the power of shards now that many players have earned and upgraded them. Huzzah! It seems like they actually understand the problem with this system and why unexpected nerfs are the wrong way to balance it, especially considering the poor balance, or really lack of balance, when you compare the three rune words against each other. So no nerfs to the shard system, so if the dev team decide to make any changes, it would obviously have to be buffs, right? That's exactly right. Earlier we got another blue post on this issue detailing some planned buffs to the Shard of Domination system as a whole. These changes will go into effect with a weekly maintenance in each region, so Tuesday for North American servers and Wednesday for European servers. Blood Link has had its damage and healing increased at all ranks by 20%. That might bring it closer in line with the power of Chaos Bane, especially for certain specializations or classes. And then Winds of Winter has had its damage and healing stored increased by about 45%. That is a huge buff, and it might actually level the playing field at least a little bit here, or at the very least make these other rune words viable for different types of content. Both Blood Link and Winds of Winter have a survivability factor to take into consideration, which might be valuable when you're playing through Torghast, or through the Korthite zone, or maybe even on some of the more healing intensive fights in the raid. The Winds of Winter also directly interact with your crit strike chance, so the classes and specs that heavily favour and stack crit might be able to get more out of this rune word. One of the most important factors to consider here is that even though the Chaos Bane rune word will not receive a buff like the other two, it also won't receive any nerfs. That means that even if your best rune word shifts around and you maybe want to go after the Winds of Winter going forward, for example, at least all of your Stygian Embers and time powering up your Unholy rune word won't have gone to waste. It's not going to decrease in power, it's still going to provide you that massive power boost. It's going to be frustrating for sure if you do need to swap around your runes and get all those Stygian Embers to get back to the level you're at, but at least your character's power level will not decrease at all when these changes go live. If the previous nerfs had stuck, anyone who was using a rune word at all would have seen a significant decrease in their overall damage or performance simply because they were nerfed across the board. With only buffs to look forward to, we won't see any decrease in player power, which feels much better in my opinion. Now, this system still has many flaws, but it should be at least a little more interesting if there's some valid competition between the three rune words. If one rune word is far and away better than the other two, like Chaos Bane has been for the entire patch up until these buffs, there's no choice. There's nothing really to consider. Hopefully these buffs are enough to change things up a bit. I do still find it very worrying when these kinds of buffs are necessary though. A 45% increase in effectiveness isn't just a rounding error or a small discrepancy, it's a massive misunderstanding of how powerful the effect is, especially when compared to the other powers on offer. I know balance hasn't exactly been Blizzard's strong suit recently, but having this system in game for so long with such a massive imbalance in the most important part of the system is really frustrating and should be something that is caught and addressed in the PTR cycle. That's what it's for, after all. If I would suggest anything going forward, it would to get the vast majority of a patch up onto the PTR to allow for significantly longer testing periods. I'm pretty sure Shards of Domination were only testable for like the last 2 weeks or so of the PTR before the patch went live, which doesn't give you a lot of testing time and honestly doesn't give you any iteration time, which is probably the main problem here. If you put this on the PTR too late, not only do you not really get any decent feedback on how this is going to work, but you definitely don't have any time to change anything if something goes wrong. But yeah, we have some big buffs coming for the Shards of Domination rune words and no nerfs to Chaos Bane, so you won't lose any power when these changes go through if you've already heavily invested into Unholy Shards, but those other shard combinations might be worth looking into as well. Another interesting change this week opened up various vendors to offer more materials, specifically Korthite crystals. That's probably what's going to interest the most players here. There are 2 vendors with some extra goodies on offer. The first is Broker Tukol. You can find this vendor in the Great Vault room in Oribos, and he will exchange anima for a variety of materials. You can trade anima for heavy callus hide, a lithium ore, or lightless silk, but you can also trade it for a Korthite crystal geode. This geode contains 5 Korthite crystals, which is potentially quite handy. That's 1/8 of the crystals you need for a legendary upgrade, but no matter how useful the Korthite geode could be, it does come at a hefty price, 25,000 anima. That's 5,000 anima per Korthite crystal. I guess if you have nothing else to do with your anima and you're just getting loads of it from all of the content in 9.1, it could definitely be worth it, but you won't be able to buy them very often. The other vendor with a small update was this chap's next door neighbor, Kotul. This is the dude who will exchange your new attendance tokens. If you don't know what an attendance token of merit is, it's the new currency option you get if you don't like any of your weekly vault rewards. So instead of flat Stygia, like it used to be, now you get some tokens you can exchange at this vendor for a variety of goodies, including Stygia, Soul Ash, Anima, and even catalogued research. Well, one more item was added onto this list, the same Korthite crystal geodes. They cost 3 tokens, which is how many you get per week, so you can arguably get an extra 5 extra Korthite crystals from your weekly vault every single week, assuming you don't want whatever gear is in there when you open it up. You can see that this vendor offers the same trade skill bags as the other vendor, but they cost Valor instead of Anima. I would have actually loved to see the Korthite crystals become purchasable for Valor as well as Anima, just to give you a few extra options for using that Valor currency as well. Maybe we'll see that sometime in the future. So if you don't like your weekly vault options and opt to take the tokens of merit, or you have a massive backlog of anima currency that you just can't spend, you can now spend them on some extra goodies, most importantly Korthite crystals for legendary crafting and upgrades. Moving on, if you remember back to last week, we talked about the nerfs to the Necrotic Wake dungeon and how all of the weapons were nerfed by about 50%, making them half as useful as they were before the changes. Well, it looks like this is another nerf that the dev team has decided to revert, sort of. The Forgotten Forge Hammer, Bloody Javelin, and Discharged Anima weapons will now deal 50% more damage, so I guess that kind of overwrites the previous nerf more or less. The Anima exhaust damage and healing from repairing a Kyrian Golem has also been buffed up by 50%, again to negate the vast majority of the nerf from last week, but that doesn't mean the entire change has been reverted. The weapon specifically will no longer scale with player damage modifier effects and can no longer critically strike, so the damage will be flat and won't scale, and the randomness of the crits has been removed. I actually think this is a decent middle ground, assuming that we had to accept lower damage values for these weapons no matter what. There was a large variance in how much damage these weapons could deal, especially if they crit. These changes will make weapon damage more reliable and reduce that variance, which means they should do the same thing pretty much every run you do of Necrotic Wake, which makes them much easier to plan around and plan for. I'm still sad that we won't be able to truck the bosses as hard as we could previously with some of the crazy setups and lucky crits, but if the weapons were getting nerfed anyway, I think this is the right way to go about it. But that's all for this week. How do you feel about the Shards of Domination rune word buffs? Does this make the system any more interesting in your mind, assuming they end up somewhat balanced, or is it still just too little too late? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone who subscribed on Twitch. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.